Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Friday, July 15th, 2016. I am Dave Biddle. Very happy to be joined by our Steve Helwagen. Steve, with so many players off to the NFL, only 6 starters coming back, there's so many position battles that are interesting for Ohio State when camp opens on August 7th. And it feels nice to say that camp's about 3 weeks away. But what position battle are you looking forward to the most? We can talk about some other position battles, but is there one position battle for Ohio State that you're looking forward to the most this camp?
Yeah, I think running back is probably the one that everyone is going to center in on just because you lose Ezekiel Elliott, who was basically an All-American. I mean, he was on some of the teams at least, and he's a guy that, you count on for 1,700, 1,800 yards. I mean, if he was in the lineup, you knew he was going to get the ball here the last 2 years. So, to me, you have Michael Weber, who's never taken a college snap in a live game, is kind of penciled in redshirt freshman as the guy, with Briante Dunn, the fifth-year senior, who we could almost say the same thing about, has never really taken a snap in a live game that mattered. And I'm being a little facetious about that because he has played at least some, but honestly, sitting behind Carlos Hyde and Ezekiel Elliott, there weren't many extra carries there for guys to have, and Dunn was in and out of the doghouse his first 3-4 years, whatever it's been. And so, I want to see how that checks out. Also, Antonio Williams is going to get a look as a true freshman. They talked about Demario McCall repping there to start out. And I was discussing this with somebody the other day. Said, I want to see Curtis Samuel tote that rock too a little bit. So, I mean, there's any number of guys, 3, 4, 5 guys. The depth is not great, and that kind of comes around when people ask me, well, what do you want to see Ohio State get in this recruiting class? I'd say J.K. Dobbins, who they have committed and who seems to be legitimate, and Cam Akers. If you can get them both, that would just be tremendous to help build the depth, because you're going to lose Dunn after this season anyway. So you're going to go from 3 down to 2. So if you take 2, you'll at least get back up to 4. So I'm excited to see what those guys bring, and so much of the Ohio State offense is predicated on the quarterback and the running back, and they need the running back to help take some of the load off the quarterback.
I'm glad you mentioned Curtis Samuel, because the last 2 years, including when he was a true freshman on the national championship team, he was the backup running back. He was Ezekiel's understudy, and he beat out Briante Dunn for that job. And I know everybody's assuming that Curtis Samuel will be the starting H-back, and he probably will be. But I do think he's going to be in the mix there at running back. I guess regardless, if he plays H-back or running back, he's going to be a huge part of this offense, in my opinion. Just talk more about Curtis Samuel. I know you said you ran into a buddy who wants to see him tote the rock. I want to see him tote the rock too, Steve. He looked good to me each of the last 2 years. He's one of those guys that even Urban Meyer would say, every time we talk to him, we got to get the ball to Curtis Samuel more. But I think they had so many cooks in the kitchen last year, it was hard to do that at times. But just talk a little bit about Curtis Samuel. What do you expect out of him this year?
Yeah, I agree. I want to see Curtis kind of come into his own. I think there's a thought that if he has a great season, that perhaps he could pursue a jump to the NFL. He's kind of scratched the surface the last 2 years of what he's been able to do, and played behind Elliott in 2014. He's the top returning receiver, believe it or not. I think 22 catches, something like that, with Michael Thomas leaving and really nobody else that did much of anything catching the football last season. So, there's a number of different ways they can use him, keep him healthy, which he did miss time in the spring. So I want to see, obviously, how he comes along here in fall camp and get him into the games this fall. And he's a guy that can really help them, I think, in the return game as well as on offense.
And the wide receivers, not looking at the hybrids like Curtis Samuel if he plays there, Dontre Wilson. Let's take them out of the mix for a second. Just the 2 regular wide receiver spots. Who do you think is going to be the starters? Who do you think will be the top backups? Just anything you want to say about the wide receivers? Because I find that a very interesting position battle to the wide receivers.
It is, and I think I was at the Special Skills Invitational Camp where they had about 300 special needs kids with developmental disabilities at the Woody Hayes Center yesterday. And Noah Brown was one of the players who was out on the field working with the young kids. And he looks like he's going to be a stud. He's got the big arms. He is ready to go and seems to be back 100%. from his injury that cost him all of last season. And maybe they would have won or the Big Ten championship had they had Noah Brown last year. I mean, obviously they lost the one game, but he's a guy that really would have been a difference maker in that offense. I think he's going to be the split end. Behind him, you could have Austin Mack and Torrance Gibson at the flanker position. Man, that one is wide open. Terry McLaurin, Paris Campbell, both had great spring game. Then you got Johnny Dixon and Clark, and I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out. I mean, they've got
Corey Smith.
Great guys. Corey Smith, yep, he's also in the running. He was also at that camp yesterday. He seems to be in great spirits, and he's ready to go too. So I think you got 7 or 8 guys. The issue is, they need to produce. Whoever's on the field needs to make plays, and doesn't really matter what the name is. It's whether they're going to get the production or not. Last year, beyond Michael Thomas, they did not get that production. So, you lose Jalen Marshall and Braxton Miller as well. They need some guys to step up, and it looks like to me that Campbell, McLaurin, Brown, those are probably going to be 3 of the main names, I would think, with some of those younger guys kind of filling in around the edges.
All right, let's close the show with some basketball talk. Thad Matta, I love these comments. He was quoted at a golf event on July 11th, and we have this story and this video on the front row message board. Alex Kleitman posted this yesterday, so make sure you check this out if you haven't already. But Thad Matta was talking about how he was addressing his team after they lost to Florida in the NIT this past season. And I'm going to read you the quote this is him talking to his team in the locker room. He says, quote, "Number one, I am tired of the BS. I'm going back to coaching basketball. I'm going back to running this program the way we did when we got here." Then he goes on to say, quote, "The second thing is, some of you are going to transfer. You don't know it yet, but whatever you do, don't come see me. Just shoot me a text because I'm tired of looking at you." That's what he says to these players. Then he this is just him talking to the group, the listeners at this golf event. He says, quote, "And we got rid of some of the guys we needed to get rid of. We got rid of problems, but we kept solutions. We've got the top 6 scorers coming back." I just love it. We got rid of problems, but we kept solutions. I mean, these are bold statements from Thad. Your thoughts, Steve?
Well, I had a source that indicated to me that that's the sanitized version of what he said. I think that the frustration bubbled over when the season was finally over. And, you remember a few years back when Kentucky had that team that wasn't very good, and they went to the NIT and lost on the road at Robert Morris, I think may have been a year after they won the national championship, maybe in 2013. And, John Calipari at the time made the comment, these guys hijacked the program. And he didn't really, say, anybody's name in particular, but the inference was there. A lot of the freshmen came in, thought they were Anthony Davis and Kid Gilchrist, and they weren't. They weren't that good, didn't feel like they needed to put the time and the work in, had bad attitudes. Well, I think the same thing was a parallel here for what Thad Matta was saying about the guys who left. I'm going to take the devil's advocate as I was talking to you off the show about this. None of these guys were emergency takes. They were all committed to Ohio State for well over a year before they enrolled. So for him, in hindsight, to dump on these guys, these were his handpicked guys. These were the guys that he signed instead of landing Luke Kennard and Carlton Bragg and, Asa Ahmad and whoever else. Now, we can debate the merits of those 3 guys. Kennard, to me, looks like a pretty good player. They just, couldn't get him to come to Ohio State. But they took other guys that they pinpointed, and they didn't work out. So I think he bears some of the responsibility for having guys that he had to get rid of. So it's a two-way street. They're back out recruiting right now. I know they're all over the country looking at top prospects. They've got Caleb Wesson for 2017, and the big thing now is to add a point guard or some help on the wing as well with the last 2 spots for 2017. And, Markel Johnson, another example of an Ohio kid not coming to Ohio State, going to NC State for whatever reason. And, it's kind of perpetuating itself. I mean, you win championships through great recruiting, and that's what he did when he had Oden, Conley, Sullinger, Turner, et cetera. That type of player isn't coming through that door. I mean, Russell was there for 1 year and gone. They didn't have the supporting cast to go with him. So, he's got, You've gone 5, 6, and 7 in the Big Ten the last 3 years. It's time to turn it back around, go in the other direction. And, it's great. I mean, he got to dump on some guys who left, but at the same time, the issues they have were created by themselves.
Great stuff as always from Steve Helwagen. Thank you, Steve. For more from Steve, check out our Bucknuts page on Facebook today at 1 p.m. Steve's going to do a Facebook Live where you can ask him questions. So check out our Facebook page today at 1 p.m. I'm sure Steve will put a link on the front row message board. So again, 1 p.m. today, Facebook Live with Steve Helwagen. And we're 1 week away from Friday Night Lights. We're going to have all kinds of recruiting coverage this week, but next week, Friday Night Lights, all leading up to that big cornucopia of recruiting. So it's an exciting time, and I thank the listeners out there for tuning into the show. Hope everyone has a great day and a great weekend. Let's hear some Buckeye swag, best damn band in the land.